My name is Clara, and I am 29 years old. For a living, I plan weddings. I create perfect, unforgettable days for other people. For most of my life, I believed my own perfect day would come, a day when I would finally be the center of my family's world. But just 1 week before I was set to walk down the aisle, my parents called every single guest on our list and told them the wedding was canceled. They thought they were destroying my happiness to solve my brother's latest financial crisis. What they didn't know was that a national television crew was secretly filming their every move, and they were about to become the unwilling stars of a prime-time reality TV special. If you've ever felt like you were second best in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how this unbelievable story unfolded, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because you won't want to miss a single detail of how a canceled wedding became a national spectacle. To understand how my wedding day turned into a televised intervention, you have to understand the foundation our family was built on. It was a foundation of quiet, persistent injustice, a landscape where I was the reliable, steady ground, and my younger brother Mark was the dazzling, unpredictable volcano that demanded everyone's constant attention and resources. I was the responsible one, the planner, the fixer. From the time I was a little girl, I was praised for being mature, for being self-sufficient, for never causing trouble. My parents, Robert and Susan, would often say it with a sigh of relief. Thank goodness we have Clara. She's just so easy. What they meant was that I didn't require anything from them, not their time, not their money, and certainly not their emotional energy, because all of that was reserved for Mark. Mark is 3 years younger than me, blessed with the kind of effortless charm that makes people forgive his endless stream of failures. He was never the golden child in a way that was malicious. He was the golden child because he was a perpetual project, a startup guy with a new world-changing idea every 6 months that somehow always required a significant investment from our parents' retirement fund. My successes were expected, footnotes in the grand, dramatic saga of Mark's potential. His failures were romanticized as the battle scars of a burgeoning genius. This pattern wasn't just a feeling. It was a documented history written in 1,000 tiny cuts over nearly 3 decades. I remember my college graduation with painful clarity. I was the first in our family to get a degree from a 4-year university, an achievement I had worked for tirelessly, juggling 2 part-time jobs to supplement my scholarships. My parents were there, of course, sitting in the audience. But as I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, I scanned the crowd for their proud faces and found their seats empty. A frantic text from my mom came through minutes later. "Sorry, honey. Mark had an emergency. Had to run. So proud of you." The emergency, I later found out, was that Mark had lost several $1,000s in a high-stakes poker game and had called them in a panic, claiming his business associates were threatening him. They left my graduation, my once-in-a-lifetime moment, to drive 2 hours and pay off a gambling debt for their 21-year-old son. When I confronted them later, my father simply patted my shoulder and said, "You're strong, Clara. You understand. Mark, he just feels things more deeply." The message was clear. My strength was a convenience that absolved them of their parental duties. A few years later, after saving every penny from my entry-level job at an event planning company, I finally had enough for a down payment on a small 1-bedroom condo. It was a shoebox, really, but it was mine. I was bursting with pride when I invited my parents over to see it. They walked through it, offering polite but lukewarm compliments. "It's very practical, dear," my mother said, running a hand over the laminate countertop. That very same week, they co-signed a lease and paid the security deposit for Mark on a luxury 2-bedroom apartment in the trendiest part of the city, complete with a rooftop pool and concierge service. His latest venture, an app for rating public restrooms, had just collapsed, leaving him with no income and mounting debt. "He needs a professional address to attract new investors," my father explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "You have to spend money to make money. You understand? You're the practical one." Christmas was a yearly masterclass in this dynamic. I would receive a sensible sweater or a gift card to a department store. Mark, one year, received a brand new car because his old one was unreliable for client meetings. Another year, they paid off his $10,000 credit card debt, and called it his Christmas and birthday gift combined. My gifts were tokens. His were financial rescue packages disguised as holiday cheer. I learned to stop expecting fairness. I built my own life, pouring my energy into my career. I found my passion in wedding planning, in creating the kind of flawless, joyful days I felt I had been denied. I loved seeing the look on a bride's face when she walked into a room I had transformed. A space that was entirely about her and her partner, a world where for one day, they were the undisputed center of the universe. I became very good at my job, eventually opening my own boutique firm, Clarity Events. I was successful, independent, and financially stable. And to my parents, I was the perfect, self-sustaining daughter who required no maintenance, freeing them up to focus on the high-maintenance son who was still, at 26, living in a condo they subsidized, driving a car they paid for, and chasing dreams they funded. Then, I met Ethan. Ethan was everything my parents claimed they wanted for me. He was kind, intelligent, and incredibly successful as a producer for a major television network. We met when he was producing a documentary segment on the wedding industry, and my firm was one of those featured. Our connection was immediate and profound. He saw me not the responsible daughter or the capable planner, but the woman underneath it all. He was the first person who ever made me feel like I didn't have to be the easy one. With him, I could be complicated. I could be tired. I could be vulnerable. He loved me for it. When I introduced him to my parents, their reaction was predictably muted. They were polite, but I could see the gears turning in their heads. My father spent the entire dinner talking about Mark's latest brilliant idea, barely asking Ethan about his impressive career. It was as if my happiness was a minor subplot, a distraction from the main story. Still, when Ethan proposed a year later on a trip to Italy, with a ring he had designed himself and a speech that made me weep with joy, I held onto a sliver of hope. This, I thought, would have to be different. A wedding is a sacred thing. It's a moment when a family is supposed to rally around their daughter, to celebrate her, to finally, unequivocally, make it about her. I thought my wedding, my one perfect day, would finally be the exception to the rule. I couldn't have been more wrong. The catalyst wasn't a single, explosive event. It was a quiet, insidious suggestion that landed with the weight of a prophecy just a week after Ethan and I announced our engagement. We had gathered at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, the glow of my new ring still feeling foreign and magical on my finger. I had brought my planning binder, a pristine white leather book, excited to share my initial ideas with my mom, the color palettes, the venue styles, the flower arrangements I had been dreaming of since I was a little girl. We were thinking next fall, I said, flipping to a page with swatches of deep burgundy and dusty rose. The foliage in New England is just breathtaking, and it gives us about a year to plan everything perfectly. My mother glanced at the binder but didn't really look at it. She exchanged a look with my father, a silent conversation I had learned to decode over years of observation. It was the, "How do we handle this?" look. The one that always preceded a request that would benefit Mark at my expense. "That's lovely, dear," my father started, clearing his throat. "But we were thinking, well, Mark is at a very delicate stage with his new company." His new company was an online subscription service for artisanal, ethically sourced toothpicks. This was his big idea, the one he claimed would make him a millionaire before he turned 30. "What does Mark's company have to do with our wedding date?" Ethan asked, his tone polite but with a firm edge that I admired. Well, my mother jumped in, her voice taking on that gentle, pleading tone she used when she was about to be completely unreasonable. "A big wedding. It's a huge expense. And it's a lot of attention. We're worried that it might overshadow Mark's launch. He needs all the family's focus and resources right now to make this a success. A big family event like a wedding could be a distraction." I stared at her, speechless. They wanted me to postpone my wedding so it wouldn't be a distraction from my brother's toothpick business. "So, what are you suggesting?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Maybe just a longer engagement," my father offered. "Give Mark a year or two to get his business off the ground. Once he's stable, we can all celebrate your wedding without any other pressures." The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. They weren't asking me to change the date by a few weeks. They were asking me to put my life on hold for 2 years so my brother could sell fancy toothpicks on the internet. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table. With all due respect, Robert, he said calmly, Clara's and my life together isn't something that can be put on a timetable to accommodate Mark's business ventures. We're getting married next fall. The finality in his voice shut them down, but I could see the displeasure in their eyes. We had failed the first test. We had failed to put Mark first. A few weeks later, the true catalyst emerged, disguised as a stroke of incredible luck. Ethan came home from work one evening with a spark in his eye. "I have a crazy idea," he said, pulling me onto the couch. "You know that new reality show my network is developing? The one about people with interesting professions?" I nodded. He had mentioned it briefly. A show that followed people through a life-changing event related to their career. "Well, I pitched a concept for the premiere season and the executives loved it," he continued, his excitement growing. "It's called Dream Day. We follow a wedding industry professional as they plan their own wedding. We'd capture the whole process, the highs, the lows, the drama. It's authentic, it's emotional, it's perfect television." And I told them I know the perfect subject. He looked at me, his smile wide. "You, Clara. They want to feature you and our wedding." It was a staggering opportunity. The network would provide a generous budget contribution, and the exposure for my business would be immeasurable. It was a dream come true, a chance to have the wedding I'd always wanted and elevate my career to a national level. But as the excitement settled, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. My family. How would they react? The request to postpone our wedding was still fresh in my mind. If they thought a normal wedding was a distraction, what would they think of a televised one? "They'll make it a nightmare, Ethan," I whispered. "My mom will try to take over, my dad will see it as a source of money for Mark, and Mark, he'll find a way to make himself the star of the show." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he took my hands. "What if they didn't know?" he said slowly. "What if to them it's not a primetime network show? What if it's just a small independent project? We could tell them one of my protégés, a film student, is making a documentary about your business and wants to film the wedding as the finale. Small crew, low profile, no mention of the network or the real scale of it. We keep it a secret until after the fact." It felt deceptive, a white lie born of necessity. But the thought of planning my wedding in peace, free from their interference and ulterior motives, was intoxicating. We could have the wedding of our dreams, captured beautifully, and they would be none the wiser. It seemed like the perfect solution. "Okay," I agreed, a sense of relief washing over me. "Let's do it. It's our secret." That small, white lie, meant to protect my peace and preserve my joy, would soon become the very stage for my family's greatest betrayal, transforming my dream day into a trial by fire. I had no idea that the student film crew would end up capturing evidence of a conspiracy so cold and calculated it would shatter my world, only to rebuild it in a way I never thought possible. The moment we told my parents about the documentary, the change was palpable. The idea that their family, and by extension, Mark's genius might be captured on film, even for a supposed student project, flipped a switch in their minds. My wedding was no longer a distraction. It was an opportunity. And they began a campaign of escalating interference that felt less like help and more like a hostile takeover. The first battle was fought over the dress. I had found it a month earlier with my best friend and maid of honor, Chloe. It was a simple A-line gown with delicate, hand-stitched lace on the bodice and a flowing silk skirt. When I put it on, I felt like myself, only more so. It was elegant, timeless, and understated. I cried when I saw my reflection, the first truly happy tears I had shed in the entire planning process. I made the mistake of showing a picture to my mother, hoping she would share in my joy. She stared at the photo on my phone, her lips pursed. "It's nice, Clara. Very simple," she said, the word simple landing like an insult. "But have you seen the prices for these things? It's obscene. You know, that money could be much better spent." "Spent on what?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Well, Mark's toothpick subscription boxes need custom packaging. A professional look is crucial for brand identity. An investment of a few $1,000s now could pay dividends for his future. This dress is just for one day. A strong brand is forever. I felt the familiar heat of anger rise in my chest. Mom, this is my wedding dress. I am not cashing it in to pay for my brother's toothpick boxes. She sighed, a long, martyred sound. You're just not thinking like a businesswoman, dear. It's about asset allocation. She made it sound like I was proposing a frivolous corporate expenditure, not choosing the dress I would wear to marry the love of my life. The next skirmish took place at the venue. Ethan and I had fallen in love with a restored historical library with soaring ceilings, stained glass windows, and a romantic, intellectual charm that felt perfect for us. We booked it immediately. 2 weeks later, I received a mortified call from the venue manager, a woman named Patricia. "Clara," she began, her voice strained with embarrassment. I had a very unusual call this morning. From your father." My stomach dropped. Oh no. What did he do? He told me that as the father of the bride, he was entitled to a significant family discount. He said our standard rates were exorbitant, and that if we wanted to be featured in your little film, we should be willing to negotiate. He even mentioned that his son was an important entrepreneur who might be able to bring us a lot of business. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. My father, in an attempt to save a few dollars that he wasn't even paying, had tried to strong-arm our venue, using my wedding and Mark's non-existent influence as leverage. I apologized profusely to Patricia, assured her we would be paying the full price, and hung up, my face burning with humiliation. When I confronted him, he was completely unrepentant. "I was just looking out for you," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "These places always overcharge. You have to be aggressive. Mark knows that. It's business 101. He didn't see the disrespect. He only saw a failed negotiation. He didn't understand that he had treated my wedding like a flea market transaction. The guest list became the next war zone. My parents insisted on inviting a long list of Mark's contacts, people he had met at networking events, potential investors he was trying to woo, and a few questionable characters from his past ventures. "These are important people for Mark to cultivate," my mother insisted, handing me a list of 20 names I didn't recognize. "A wedding is the perfect networking opportunity. It shows stability and success." "It's my wedding, not Mark's business mixer," I argued, my voice tight. "We have a limited number of seats, and they should be filled with people who love and support Ethan and me, not people Mark wants to hit up for money." The argument raged for days. They accused me of being selfish, of actively sabotaging my brother's career. "After all we've done for you," my father said, a line that always preceded a guilt trip, "the least you can do is help your brother build his network." It never occurred to them that what they had done for me was largely ignore me while they enabled him. In the end, I held firm, and they sulked for a week, acting as if I had committed an unforgivable act of familial treason. Through it all, the student film crew, 2 talented young filmmakers named Ben and Sarah, who were actually veteran network cinematographers, captured everything. They were discreet, professional, and brilliant at making themselves invisible. They filmed my mother's dismissive comments about my dress, my father's smug retelling of his call to the venue, and the heated arguments over the guest list. At the time, I just thought it was background color for the documentary. I didn't realize they were collecting evidence. The final straw that broke my peaceful facade was my mother's attempt to usurp my role as the planner. She began calling my vendors behind my back, trying to change things. She told the florist that my choice of white peonies was boring, and that they should add bright pink roses for a pop of color. She called the caterer to insist they add a steak option to the menu, even though Ethan and I are both vegetarians. Each time, I had to call the vendors back, apologize for the confusion, and reconfirm my original decisions. It was exhausting and demeaning. She was treating me like an incompetent amateur, not a professional with over a decade of experience. My best friend, Chloe, witnessed one of these phone calls. I was on the phone with the baker, patiently explaining for the 3rd time that we did not want a 5-tiered cake with a gaudy gold frosting. After I hung up, my head in my hands, Chloe put her arm around me. "Clara, this isn't normal," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "My mom was excited about my wedding, but she never tried to bulldoze me like this. This isn't help. This is a deliberate attempt to erase you from your own wedding. They are so used to you being the supporting character in the Mark show that they can't handle you being the star. Hearing her say it aloud was the validation I desperately needed. I wasn't being oversensitive. I wasn't being a bridezilla. I was being systematically undermined by my own family. Their deep-seated belief that Mark's needs and wants superseded everyone else's was so ingrained that they were incapable of seeing my wedding as anything other than a new stage for his story and a new resource for them to exploit. I tried to have one last, heartfelt conversation with them. I sat them down in their living room, the camera crew discreetly positioned in the corner. "I need this to be my day," I pleaded, my voice thick with emotion. "I need you to be the parents of the bride, not Mark's managers. I just need your support." My mother patted my hand, her expression one of pitying confusion. "Oh, Clara, you're just stressed," she said, completely missing the point. "All brides get like this. You're being so sensitive. We're only trying to make sure everything is perfect." That was when I knew it was hopeless. Their definition of perfect was a day that served their agenda and reinforced the family hierarchy. My definition of perfect was a day where I could marry the man I loved without having to fight for my own relevance. I held on to the hope that on the actual day, when they saw me in my dress, when they saw the love between Ethan and me, something would click. They would finally see me, their daughter. I didn't realize they were already plotting something far more drastic, a final, desperate move that would ensure no one would see me at all. The final week before the wedding should have been a blissful whirlwind of last-minute details and joyful anticipation. Instead, it felt like the countdown to a Category 5 hurricane. The atmosphere in my parents' orbit was thick with a tense, manufactured drama, and at the center of it, as always, was Mark. His artisanal toothpick business was, predictably, imploding. Apparently, the market for $30 a month curated toothpicks was not as robust as he had projected. According to the frantic, hushed phone calls I overheard between him and my parents, a key investor who I suspect was just another one of my father's golf buddies he'd strong-armed into a bad investment had pulled out. Mark was facing what he dramatically termed total financial ruin. He claimed he needed $50,000 immediately to cover production costs and avoid lawsuits from his likely non-existent suppliers. I tried to tune it out. This was a familiar script. A Mark-created crisis always conveniently appeared just before a major life event of mine, as if to remind me of my secondary place in the family solar system. I focused on my final dress fitting, on writing my vows, on the seating chart that was proving to be a logistical nightmare. I was determined to protect the bubble of happiness Ethan and I had created. That bubble was burst on Tuesday night, just 4 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. My parents asked Ethan and me to come over for a quick, important chat. The moment we walked in, I knew this was different. The air was heavy, funereal. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father was pacing the living room floor, a look of grim determination on his face. Mark was sitting on the sofa, head in his hands, performing the role of a tortured genius on the brink of collapse. "Sit down," my father said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He gestured to the armchairs opposite Mark. We sat, and he launched into a monologue about sacrifice, about family loyalty, about how sometimes the needs of the one must be met by the many. It was a rambling, self-serving speech that ended with a demand so monstrous, so utterly unthinkable, that for a moment I was sure I had misheard him. "We need you to give Mark the wedding money," he said, his eyes fixed on me. "All of it." I stared at him. A laugh of pure disbelief caught in my throat. "I'm sorry. What?" "The $50,000, my mother elaborated, her voice trembling with misplaced emotion. "It's the exact amount he needs to save his company. It's a sign. You and Ethan can just go to the courthouse. A wedding is just a party, Clara. A piece of paper is what matters. This is your brother's entire future on the line." The room fell silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like hammer blows against my skull. They were looking at me, at the wedding I had meticulously planned, the day I had dreamed of, the celebration of my love for Ethan, and seeing nothing but a line item in their budget, a liquid asset that could be diverted to fix my brother's latest catastrophic failure. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like a physical object in the room, solid and immovable. "What do you mean, no?" my father thundered, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is your brother! Your family!" "This is my wedding," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "It is the start of my family with Ethan. It is not a slush fund for Mark's bad business ideas." Ethan, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Robert, Susan," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "What you are asking is not only inappropriate, it's cruel. We are not canceling our wedding, and we are certainly not giving you our wedding budget." Mark looked up, his face a mask of wounded betrayal. "I can't believe this," he whispered, as if we were the ones being unreasonable. "I would do it for you, Clara." The lie was so audacious it was almost impressive. That was when my father delivered the final blow, the words that would sever the last frayed thread of hope I had for our relationship. He walked over and stood directly in front of me, looking down at me with an expression of cold disappointment. "Fine," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I see how it is. You've always been selfish, always thinking about yourself. If you value a party more than your own brother's survival, then maybe you shouldn't have a party at all." The threat hung in the air, ugly and explicit. It wasn't just a threat. It was a revelation. It was the final, unmasking moment. In their eyes, my joy was a luxury. My milestones were negotiable, and my life was secondary. I was not their daughter in that moment. I was a failed asset, an uncooperative subordinate who had refused a direct order. I looked from my father's furious face to my mother's tear-streaked one, to my brother's petulant pout. I saw them, really saw them, for the first time without the filter of hope or duty, and I realized that they were never going to change. They would continue to demand, to take, and to sacrifice my happiness on the altar of my brother's ego for the rest of their lives, if I let them. A strange calm washed over me. The anger, the hurt, the years of quiet resentment, they all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. The fight was over. They had made their choice. Now, I would make mine. "Okay," I said, standing up. "I understand." They mistook my calm for surrender. A flicker of triumph crossed my father's face. "Good," he said. "I'll call Mark's investor in the morning and tell him the funds are secured." "You do that?" I said, my voice even. I looked at Ethan, and he understood immediately. We stood up and walked to the door. "Where are you going?" my mother asked, confused. I turned back to look at them one last time. "To finish planning my wedding," I said. "The one you won't be attending." They thought they had delivered the final, crushing blow, forcing me to choose between my wedding and my family. What they didn't know was that they had just given me the greatest gift of all, the freedom to choose my own happiness without guilt or reservation. They had handed me the script for their own public humiliation, and I was about to give the performance of a lifetime. The drive back to our apartment was silent. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a glacial rage. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, clear, and focused. My mind, the mind of a planner who juggles a dozen vendors and 100 details, was already working, recalculating, re-strategizing. They had declared war on my wedding day. They were about to find out that I was the one who designed the battlefield. As soon as we walked through the door, I collapsed onto the sofa, the adrenaline finally giving way to a wave of grief. "They actually did it, Ethan," I whispered, the reality crashing down on me. They were willing to trade my wedding for his toothpicks. Ethan knelt in front of me and took my hands. His face wasn't angry. It was fiercely calm. "I know," he said, his voice steady, "and they are going to regret it more than they can possibly imagine." He pulled out his phone. "It's time, Clara. The student film is about to get a major network upgrade. I'm calling my executive producer." For the next hour, our apartment transformed into a television production command center. Ethan was on the phone. Speaking a language of network logistics, I barely understood remote broadcast packages, live feed capabilities, hidden camera assets. He was no longer just my supportive fiancé. He was a seasoned producer, a master of narrative, and he was about to produce the episode of his career. The plan, as it unfolded, was brilliant in its audacity. The Dream Day special was no longer just a heartwarming look at a planner's wedding. It was now a high-stakes drama with a shocking twist. Our small crew, Ben and Sarah, were just the tip of the iceberg. Ethan had a full production team on standby, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. They think they can control the narrative by telling people the wedding is off, Ethan explained, pacing the living room. We're going to control it by showing everyone the truth. We're not canceling anything. We're going to turn your parents' sabotage into the show's live finale. The first step was to gather irrefutable evidence. The conversation at my parents' house had been filmed by a micro-camera hidden in my purse, a standard precaution Ethan's team used for reality show development. The audio was crystal clear. Their demand, their ultimatum, my refusal. It was the inciting incident. Next, we needed to prove their follow-through. Ethan made a call to my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister and a notorious gossip, but also someone who had a soft spot for me. He put her on speakerphone. "Hi, Carol, it's Ethan," he said warmly. "Clara and I were just finalizing some seating arrangements and had a question about the kids' table. Are you bringing your grandsons?" There was a pause. "Oh, Ethan, honey," Carol said, her voice filled with pity. "Susan called me an hour ago. She told me the wedding was off. Something about you two having a terrible fight and deciding to call it quits." She said Clara was just devastated. "I'm so sorry." Bingo. Ethan thanked her, assured her there was a misunderstanding he would clear up later, and hung up. My own mother was not just saying the wedding was canceled. She was lying about the reason, painting me as a jilted bride to garner sympathy and cover their tracks. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. The plan had two parts. Part one was damage control. We drafted a carefully worded text message that went out to every single confirmed guest. "Dear friends and family, we've become aware of a strange rumor that our wedding is canceled. Please be assured this is false. There has been a serious and upsetting family misunderstanding, but we are more excited than ever to celebrate with you all on Saturday. Your presence and support mean the world to us. See you at the library. Love, Clara and Ethan." Part two was the trap. My parents and Mark would, of course, not receive that text. They would operate under the assumption that their plan had worked, that the venue would be empty. On the wedding day, Ethan laid out, drawing a diagram on a whiteboard he'd pulled from his home office. We will have two separate experiences running simultaneously. The real wedding will be happening in the main library hall with our guests, but you, your parents, and Mark will be directed to a private family lounge before the ceremony begins. "What's the lounge?" I asked. "It's a small conference room in the library's basement," he said with a grim smile, "which my team is currently outfitting as a high-tech screening room. We'll tell them we need to have a private conversation to officially inform the vendors and sign cancellation papers. They'll walk in expecting to finalize their victory. Instead, they'll be the captive audience for the world premiere of a film titled The Sabotage of a Daughter's Wedding, starring themselves." The sheer poetic justice of it was breathtaking. They had tried to turn my dream day into an empty room, and we were going to trap them in a small room to force them to watch my dream come true. For the next 3 days, I lived a double life. To the outside world, I was a radiant bride-to-be, confirming final details with my vendors and beaming with excitement. Internally, I was a co-conspirator in a covert operation. Ben and Sarah continued their documentary filming, capturing my meetings with the florist and the final dress fitting, all while a second, hidden team was wiring the library's basement for a live broadcast. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was overshadowed by a sense of purpose. This was no longer just about getting married. It was about reclaiming my story. For decades, they had written the narrative, casting me as the supporting role. Now, I was taking the pen. On Friday, the day before the wedding, Ethan's lead editor showed us a rough cut of the opening segment for the screening. It was a masterpiece of storytelling. It started with happy childhood photos of me, then shifted to footage of me working, talking passionately about my love for creating perfect weddings. It intercut this with the hidden camera footage from my parents' house, their cold demands, their dismissive attitudes. Then, it showed the recorded phone call with Aunt Carol, followed by a montage of other relatives who had been called, all expressing their shock and confusion. Watching it, I felt a tremor of fear. This was real. This was irreversible. We were about to publicly expose my own parents. "Are we sure about this?" I whispered to Ethan. He put his arm around me and pointed to the screen, where the editor had frozen on a shot of my father's face as he delivered his ultimatum. "They made this choice, Clara," he said softly, but firmly. "Not you. They chose to betray you. We are just choosing to turn on the lights so everyone can see it." He was right. Secrecy was their weapon. Transparency would be mine. The stage was set. The cameras were rolling. And my parents were about to give the performance of a lifetime, completely unaware that the whole world was watching. The morning of my wedding day dawned crisp and bright, the autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of my hotel suite. My bridesmaids, led by Chloe, buzzed around me, a flurry of silk robes and champagne flutes, creating a protective barrier of joy. On the surface, everything was perfect. My hair was being swept into an elegant chignon. My makeup was flawless, and my beautiful, simple dress hung by the window, waiting for me. But beneath the calm facade, my heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just my wedding day, it was D-Day. As we rode to the venue, I received a text from Ethan. "The audience is seated. Both of them. See you at the altar. I love you." A wave of relief and terror washed over me. They were in the trap. My parents and Mark had arrived at the library 20 minutes earlier, dressed in funereal tones, their faces set in grim, self-satisfied expressions. As planned, a production assistant, posing as a venue coordinator, intercepted them at the entrance. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans." "Mark," she said, her voice dripping with professional sympathy. "Clara and Ethan are so devastated. They've asked to meet with you in a private family lounge to discuss the next steps before they make the official announcement. If you'll just follow me." They followed her, smug and confident, down a quiet hallway and into the small, windowless conference room in the basement. It was furnished simply with 3 comfortable armchairs facing a large, blank television screen on the wall. The production assistant offered them water, told them I would be down in a moment, and then quietly exited, locking the door from the outside. Hidden cameras, disguised as smoke detectors and electrical outlets, whirred to life. Meanwhile, upstairs in the main hall, our wedding was proceeding as planned. The string quartet played Vivaldi as 150 of our friends and family, all of whom had been briefed via our mass text, filled the seats. There was a buzz in the air, a mixture of confusion and supportive excitement. They knew something unusual was happening, but they didn't know what. Back in the screening room, my parents were growing impatient. "Where is she?" my father grumbled, checking his watch. "This is unprofessional." Suddenly, the large screen flickered to life. But it wasn't me. It was a professionally produced title card. Dream Day, the Clara and Ethan story. Their confusion was visible. "What is this?" my mother murmured. Then the film began. It opened with the beautiful, soft focus footage of me talking about my passion for weddings, followed by loving interviews with Ethan. Then, the tone shifted. The screen cut to the grainy, hidden camera footage from their living room. They watched themselves, their voices tinny and cruel, as they demanded we cancel our wedding. They saw my father deliver his final, cold ultimatum. My mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. My father sat bolt upright, his face paling. Mark just stared, his jaw slack. The video cut to the recorded phone call with Aunt Carol, her voice filling the small room. "Susan called me. She told me the wedding was off." Clara was just devastated. It was followed by a montage of other relatives, their voices layered over each other, all repeating the same story my parents had fed them. They were trapped, forced to watch a highlight reel of their own treachery. There was no escape, no way to spin the narrative, no one to gaslight. There was only the undeniable, recorded truth of their actions, played back for them in high definition. The final shot of the pre-recorded package was a close-up of my face, tears in my eyes, right after I had left their house that night. Then, the screen changed. It now showed a live feed, broadcast from a hidden camera at the back of the main hall upstairs. The image was of a packed room, a beautiful aisle lined with flowers, and Ethan standing at the altar, waiting. My mother let out a small, strangled sob. "They're all here," she whispered. She didn't cancel. The live feed then cut to a camera positioned in the bridal waiting room. It showed me, standing in my wedding dress, looking not devastated, but serene and strong. I looked directly into the lens, as if I were looking right through the screen and into their eyes. "Hello, Mom, Dad, Mark," I said, my voice clear and steady, piped directly into their room. "I'm sure you're surprised to see all our guests. You worked so hard to make sure this room would be empty. You told me to choose between my brother's future and my own happiness. You told me a wedding was just a party, but you were wrong. A wedding is a promise. It's a celebration of love and support, something you tried to take away from me. You wanted to make sure no one came to my wedding. Instead, you've only made sure that millions of people will see exactly why I am better off without your version of love." I took a breath. "The show must go on," I said with a small, sad smile. "And your part in it is now over." The screen in their room switched back to the live feed from the main hall. They watched, helpless and horrified, as the doors opened and I began my walk down the aisle, not with my father, but with Chloe by my side. The room erupted in applause, a wave of love and support so powerful I felt it physically lift me up. As I reached the altar, Ethan took my hands. His eyes were shining with tears and an immense pride that took my breath away. We turned to face the officiant, but also to face our guests, our real family. Our vows were not the ones we had originally written. We had rewritten them the night before. They were promises not just to each other, but declarations of the life we were choosing to build. "I promise to always be your partner," Ethan said, his voice ringing with conviction. "To protect your peace, to celebrate your joy, and to build a family with you where love is not a transaction, but an unconditional gift." When it was my turn, I looked out at our friends, then imagined looking past them to the small room in the basement. "I promise," I said, my voice unwavering, "to build a home with you founded on respect, honesty, and kindness, to choose us always, and to never again allow anyone to make me feel small or secondary in my own life." As the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Ethan pulled me close. The applause from our guests was deafening, a roar of validation and joy. But as we kissed, a triumphant final act in a drama they could no longer control, all I could think about was the profound, damning silence in that little room, and what would happen when the cameras and the lights finally turned off. The rest of our wedding day was an absolute dream, a perfect bubble of joy, completely insulated from the toxicity we had just excised. There was no dramatic confrontation after the ceremony, no tearful showdown at the reception. While our guests enjoyed the cocktail hour, a security guard, hired by Ethan's production team, discreetly unlocked the door to the screening room. My parents and Mark slipped out a basement-level side exit, unseen and unheard, vanishing from my perfect day like ghosts. The relief was immediate and total. Dancing with Ethan for our first dance, surrounded by the smiling faces of people who had shown up for us, I felt a lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing for my entire life. It was the feeling of a weight I had been carrying since childhood finally being lifted. For the first time, there was no undercurrent of obligation, no pressure to manage my brother's ego or my parents' expectations. There was only love, pure and uncomplicated. Our friends and family, having been clued in by the production team after the ceremony, treated us with a gentle, fierce protectiveness all night. Aunt Carol hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. "I am so proud of you," she whispered, "and so sorry for what they put you through." Many of our relatives came up to us with similar sentiments, sharing stories of my parents' manipulative calls and expressing their disgust. It was a strange and validating experience, hearing my private reality confirmed by so many others. A few weeks later, the Dream Day special aired. Ethan and I watched it from the couch in our apartment, curled up under a blanket with a bottle of champagne. It was brilliantly edited, a masterful piece of television that told our story with compassion but unflinching honesty. It didn't paint my parents as one-dimensional villains, but as deeply flawed people whose obsession with their son had blinded them to their daughter's worth. The finale, with the split screen showing their horrified faces in the basement while I walked down the aisle to a cheering crowd, was one of the most talked-about television moments of the year. The public response was a tsunami. My business's website crashed from the traffic. My email inbox was flooded with messages from strangers, women mostly sharing their own stories of being the lesser child, of dealing with toxic family dynamics, of finding the courage to choose themselves. I had thought my story was unique in its extremity, but I quickly learned that the themes were universal. I had accidentally become a symbol of something much bigger. The fallout for my family was swift and severe. In our relatively small, well-connected community, they became social pariahs. Friends they had known for decades stopped returning their calls. They were politely uninvited from the country club. The public shaming was intense. Mark's artisanal toothpick company, which had been featured in the special as the reason for the whole debacle, became a laughingstock online. His professional reputation, which he so desperately wanted to build, was annihilated overnight. He couldn't get a meeting with a dog catcher, let alone a venture capitalist. They had tried to cancel my wedding, and in the process, they had gotten themselves canceled by the world. Ethan and I used the money from the network special, combined with our own savings, to put a down payment on a beautiful house in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. It had a big kitchen for us to cook in together and a small, sunny room that I converted into a home office. Unpacking our boxes, setting up our life together in a space that was entirely ours, felt like the true beginning. We had no contact with my parents or Mark. They didn't call. We didn't reach out. There was a vast, silent chasm between us, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be bridged. Part of me felt a pang of guilt watching my family implode so publicly. But then I would remember my father's cold face as he demanded I sacrifice my future for my brothers, and the guilt would vanish, replaced by the quiet certainty that I had done the only thing I could do to save myself. We had won the battle in the most spectacular way possible, but I knew the war for my own peace of mind, for understanding how to live in a world where your own parents could betray you so profoundly was just beginning. Could a family ever truly recover from a betrayal broadcast in high definition? I wasn't sure I even wanted to find out. 18 months passed in a blur of wallpaper samples and client contracts, of learning the rhythms of a new life and the quiet joy of a peaceful home. The second autumn since our wedding painted the New England trees in shades of fire and gold, and the crispness in the air felt less like an ending and more like a clean, fresh start. Our life was unrecognizable from the tense, drama-filled existence we had escaped. It was defined not by what was happening to us, but by what we were actively, joyfully building together. The success of Dream Day had been a sustained whirlwind, not a fleeting moment of fame. The Emmy nomination, which we attended with a sense of surreal disbelief, led to Ethan being offered the position of head of unscripted development at his network. He was now in charge of finding and shaping stories like ours, a role he took on with immense passion and integrity. My own business, Clarity Events, had not just grown, it had transformed. I was no longer a boutique planner but the founder of a national brand with a waiting list that stretched into the next 2 years. I had hired a team of 4 talented planners, moved into a beautiful new office downtown, and launched a series of online courses that were empowering other young women to build their own careers in the industry. The show had given me a platform, and I was determined to stand on it, not just for myself, but for others. We were financially secure, deeply in love, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free from the gravitational pull of my family's dysfunction. The justice that found my parents and brother wasn't a sudden bolt of lightning, but a slow, grinding erosion of the world they had built on a foundation of entitlement and denial. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of their own actions. The public humiliation was the initial shock, but the long-term effects were what truly altered their reality. They sold their large house in our hometown, the house where I'd felt both invisible and scrutinized my entire life, and moved to a small, anonymous town in a neighboring state. Aunt Carol told me the move was a desperate flight from the shame, but it was also a financial necessity. Without the social network my father had cultivated for decades, a network that now viewed him as a treacherous fool, his consulting work evaporated. The golf club memberships, the charity boards, the casual business deals made over expensive lunches, all of it vanished. They were forced to live on their actual retirement savings, which, after years of funding Mark's failures, were far smaller than they had pretended. And Mark? His karmic education was the most profound. Stripped of his parents' financial safety net and his own manufactured reputation, he was thrust into the unforgiving reality of the real world. His parade of failed startups came to a final, sputtering end. He tried to launch one more disruptive tech company, but his name was now a punchline in local business circles. No one would invest, no one would partner, no one would even take his calls. The world he had tried to conquer had firmly and collectively rejected him. According to Aunt Carol, who still received the occasional, miserable phone call from my mother, Mark now worked as an assistant manager at a rental car agency near his new town. She described a scene my mother had tearfully recounted. Mark, in a slightly too tight polyester uniform, patiently explaining insurance liability to a furious tourist whose minivan had a flat tire. It was honest, necessary work, but for a man who saw himself as the next Steve Jobs, it was a public and deeply humbling fall from a grace he had never earned. For the first time in his 31 years, he was completely self-sufficient, a state of being my parents had spent his entire life trying to prevent. For 10 long, silent months, we heard nothing directly. Then, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived, addressed to me in my mother's familiar, elegant script. I let it sit on our granite kitchen island for 3 days, a silent testament to a life I had left behind. I was afraid to open it, terrified it would be a plea for money, a new manipulation, a fresh accusation. When I finally did, my hands trembling slightly, I found it was none of those things. It was an apology, a raw, painful, and shockingly genuine apology. She wrote that the television special was the most excruciating but necessary experience of their lives. Seeing their own behavior played back to them, stripped of their internal justifications and self-serving narratives, had been like looking into a funhouse mirror that showed not a distorted image, but the terrifyingly real one. It had shattered their denial and forced them into counseling. The therapist asked me a simple question, she wrote, and I could almost hear her voice trembling in the words. When Clara succeeded, how did you feel? And when I searched my heart for an honest answer, Clara, it was relieved. Not proud, but relieved that you didn't need anything from us, that you were handling yourself. When Mark struggled, I felt needed. I spent your whole life being relieved by you and needed by him, and I never once stopped to consider the profound injustice of that. I mistook his need for my love, and your strength for a lack of needing it. It was a catastrophic failure of motherhood, and I am so sorry. I failed you. She detailed how my father was still grappling with his own role, that his pride was a fortress he was only just learning to dismantle brick by brick, but that he was going to therapy with her. Mark, she wrote with a sigh I could feel on the page, refused to participate. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness, or money, or a visit. It simply ended with, I hope one day you will believe that I am truly sorry for the pain we caused. I am so deeply proud of the woman you have become, not because you are successful, but because you are strong, kind, and full of grace, even when we gave you every reason to be otherwise. The letter was a crack of light in a dark room. After many long conversations with Ethan and my own therapist, I decided to respond. I called her. Our first conversation was cautious, like two people learning a new language, but it was honest. I told her I appreciated her words, but that words alone couldn't heal years of wounds. A month after that, I agreed to meet her for coffee. We met in a quiet cafe in a town that was neutral territory for both of us. My father and Mark were not invited. This was a conversation that could only happen between us. She looked older, her face etched with a sadness I'd never seen before, but the frantic, anxious energy that had always surrounded her was gone. We talked for over 2 hours. We didn't solve everything, We didn't magically erase the past, but we began to lay a new foundation, one built on the hard, unvarnished truth. I laid out my boundaries with the precision of a contract. No more money for Mark, for many of us. No more unsolicited advice. Our relationship had to be about us, not about him. She listened, and she agreed. I just want my daughter back, she said, her eyes welling with tears. In whatever capacity you'll have me. I walked away from that cafe feeling not just triumphant, but transformed. I had a mother who was finally, painfully, learning to see me as a person, not a pillar. My father and brother were on their own separate, uncertain paths, but their journey was no longer my burden to carry. My family hadn't been destroyed by the broadcast. The illusion of it had been. And in its place, something real, something fragile but honest, was beginning to grow. I knew the biggest lesson, the one that would shape the rest of my life, was still solidifying, but its form was becoming clearer with every peaceful sunset I watched from my own back deck. It's been 2 years now since the wedding that became a national headline, and the life Ethan and I have built is more beautiful, more real, than any event I could have ever planned. Our home is our sanctuary, a place filled with laughter, the smell of our mediocre but enthusiastic attempts at baking sourdough, and the quiet, grounding presence of an unconditional, unwavering love. But the most significant change, the one that has truly redefined my existence, hasn't been the new house or the successful business. It's been the profound internal shift in how I perceive my own worth and the world around me. For 29 years, I lived by an unwritten family constitution where my role was clearly defined. Be the strong one, the easy one, the one who never asks for anything. I operated under the toxic assumption that love, especially the love of a parent, was something I had to earn through constant compliance and quiet self-sacrifice. I thought being strong and easy was a virtue, a badge of honor that made me a good daughter. The television special, in all its brutal, high-definition clarity, was a forced re-education. It taught me a lesson that years of therapy alone never could have. Being easy doesn't make people love you more. It just makes you easier to overlook and, ultimately, easier to use. My strength was not a character trait they admired. It was a resource they exploited to fuel my brother's endless cycle of failure and fantasy. They didn't love me for being strong. They loved that my strength meant they didn't have to bother loving me actively. True love, I learned, isn't passive. It doesn't seek the path of least resistance. It shows up, it defends, it protects. It celebrates, especially when it's inconvenient. The most beautiful irony of my story is that my parents' calculated act of sabotage, their attempt to erase my moment of joy, became the very catalyst for my greatest professional and personal triumphs. The notoriety from Dream Day allowed me to transform Clarity events into something more meaningful than I had ever imagined. We now run a charitable arm called the Dream Day Fund. Using a portion of our profits, we provide full wedding planning services, free of charge, for couples who are facing extreme hardship, illness, financial disaster, or most commonly, family estrangement due to their choice of partner or lifestyle. We create perfect, breathtaking days for people who have been told, in one way or another, that they don't deserve one. Just last month, we planned a wedding for a young woman whose parents had disowned her for marrying a woman she loved. As I watched her and her bride stand under a canopy of fairy lights, surrounded by a chosen family of friends who celebrated them with fierce joy, I saw myself. I saw the universal need to be seen and loved for who we are. That work, turning my specific pain into a universal shield for others, has healed a part of me I thought would be broken forever. My relationship with my mother continues to be a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding on new, solid ground. We talk on the phone once a week, and our conversations are different now. She asks questions and truly listens to the answers. She's learning to be interested in my life without trying to manage it. She sends me pictures of the small rose garden she's started, a hobby that seems to bring her a quiet, focused peace. My father has started joining her in therapy. He still struggles to articulate his remorse, but on my birthday this year, he sent me a simple 2-sentence email. Happy birthday, Clara. I am proud to be your father. It carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. It was a beginning. I still haven't spoken to Mark. From what Aunt Carol tells me, the stark reality of working a 9-to-5 job, of being responsible for his own rent and bills, has been a harsh and humbling education. Perhaps one day, years from now, he will find the courage to apologize, not for his failures, but for his entitlement. But I am no longer waiting for that day. My peace is no longer contingent on his personal growth. My closure isn't in his hands, it's in mine. The most profound lesson I've learned is about the nature of family itself. The family you are born into is a matter of chance, a biological lottery. The family you build is a matter of choice, a conscious act of creation. My true family now includes Chloe, my maid of honor, who stood by my side as my rock when my own father refused to. It includes Aunt Carol, who chose truth over family allegiance and made the call that confirmed their betrayal. It includes my incredible, loyal team at work and the brave couples whose lives we touch. And at the very center of it all is Ethan, my partner, my producer, my co-conspirator, the man who saw a woman fighting to be seen and decided to give her a global stage. He didn't just marry me. He liberated me. He helped me burn down my old life so we could build a better, truer one from the ashes. My story became a public spectacle, a piece of primetime entertainment, but its core is a quiet, universal truth that so many of us learn the hard way. Every single one of us deserves to be the main character in our own life story. We deserve to have our joy treated as sacred, our milestones celebrated, and our happiness protected. Learning to set boundaries isn't an act of aggression or selfishness. It's a radical act of self-preservation and self-respect. Walking away from people who consistently diminish you, even if they share your blood, is not a failure. It is the ultimate success. It's choosing to honor the most important vow you can ever make, the vow you make to yourself. Have you ever had to choose between your own happiness and your family's ingrained expectations? What did that moment teach you about your own strength? I would be so honored to hear your stories and your wisdom in the comments below. Sharing our experiences is how we dismantle the shame, how we take back our narratives, and how we show each other that we are not, and have never been, alone. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen or gave you a flicker of strength, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about finding your voice, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that their perfect day and their perfect life is always, always worth fighting for. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most important vow you can ever make is the one you make to yourself. To honor, to cherish, and to protect your own peace, no matter who tries to take it away.